It is my distinct pleasure to welcome our friend and as a speaker today, Hubert Joly, who is the executive chairman of Best Buy. It's a former CEO of Best Buy for many, many years, responsible for an amazing turnaround at Best Buy. And you know, Hubert, I have a lot of comments about everything that he has done in his career, but the thing that strikes me is, you know, Hubert walked in at Best Buy at a time where Best Buy was actually going through a crisis. It was a time where Amazon was growing significantly across business categories, including the core business categories that Best Buy was involved in, electronics, and TVs and appliances, etc. And their business model was at risk. Hubert led through an amazing turnaround. And the turnaround led him, I think, to crystallize his ideas of leadership, what he calls purposeful leadership, that we're going to talk about today at the beginning, and how focusing on the right things, having a right purpose for the organization, ultimately success follows. And Best Buy is remarkably successful today. So Hubert, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you very much for joining us. I have to say, I'll be remiss if I don't recognize that Hubert is also a Deming Cup winner, and he has been a friend of the Deming Center for some time, and we hope that we'll strengthen our ties and we'll have you be more involved with the school in the future.
Thank you so much, Costis. You're very kind, and thank you for your leadership of this great institution at a time that is even more challenging in some ways than when I took Best Buy. So it's a pleasure to do this with you, for sure.
Terrific. So let me just set some ground rules. You can obviously, as you know, we'll start with the conversation with Hubert, but people can submit questions, and then we'll try to address them in the second half. We'll try to end around 1:45, and hopefully we'll make it as free-flowing as possible. But I do want to start by, you know, about exactly this issue of purposeful leadership, and if you could just walk us through what do you mean by that? What are the core values? What are the key ideas there? Do you want to walk us through that?
Sure, and I know we'll get into the details of what it means in practice, but from a principle standpoint, I would highlight, let's say, 4 principles. It starts actually with a Greek idea about, you know, for us as individuals, what is the meaning of our life? So go back to Aristotle. And why do we work in particular? Is work a curse? Is it a punishment? Or is it part of our fulfillment as individuals? And it gives us the opportunity to pursue a meaningful life. And of course, I believe more the latter than the former. So it's anchored in the idea of work is part of our quest for meaning. The second idea is that a company, if you think about it, is a human organization made of individuals working together in pursuit of a goal. And that goal, so there's been a lot of discussions in this country and around the world around what is the purpose of a corporation. Is it, according to Milton Friedman, should we follow the idea of primacy of shareholders? And I think we're all familiar that the Business Roundtable last year came out with this idea that no, we have to pursue a noble purpose, and it's about stakeholder management. And in a sense, a corporate purpose, a noble purpose, it's a bit like the Japanese concept of ikigai. It's the intersection of addressing a real need in the market, a human need, a need in the world, what my capabilities are as a company, what my dreams and aspirations are, what positive difference do I want to make? how do I want to contribute to the common good? And of course, you have to make money. And so a corporate purpose is at the intersection of these four dimensions. And then it's not just a statement that you put on a website or in a board presentation. It has to reverberate across everything at the company, in your strategy, in the initiatives, how you lead will come to this, how you mobilize the organization, and how you align everybody at the company around the pursuit of the purpose. And then the last principle, I think, in fact, has to do with leadership. And I know we'll talk about leadership in this time of crisis in particular. In the old days, last century, let's say, the model of leadership was you need to be really smart. And you take smart people, they come up with a strategy, and then maybe an implementation plan, you roll out the strategy, you put incentives in place, and you assume that people will follow. And leadership in many ways was about superheroes. It was a lot about the pursuit of power, fame, glory, or money. Greed is good. Remember the movie Wall Street. That was the old days. I think purposeful leadership is around what I call the 5 Bs of leadership. Be clear, be a purposeful leader. So be clear about your purpose as an individual, the purpose of people around you, and how it all connects with the purpose of the organization. Be clear about who you serve. If you believe you're serving yourself, I've told our officers at Best Buy, that's okay. I respect that, but you cannot work here. You can be promoted to customer, and being a customer of Best Buy is a great thing. But if on the other end, you believe you're serving the organization and people on the front line, then this is right. Be clear about your role as a leader. It's not to be the smartest person in the room. It's to create an environment in which, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people can flourish and do amazing things. It's about being values driven, of course. Integrity is essential. It's about being authentic, being vulnerable, and being the best version of yourself, and creating a sense of belonging for everybody, which I think we're seeing a lot of during this time of crisis, Costis. So that was a long answer, but these are key principles I believe in.
You put relationship with people at the core of essentially the description that you just gave us. In particular, you also touched upon shareholder primacy, and you didn't start with a strategy that focuses on profitability, short-term or long-term, but you really put sort of people and how people can be essentially empowered and to deliver sort of the purpose of the organization. Is that the main tenet or core tenet of what you were describing?
Yeah, I think the model I have in mind is a model for an organization where a noble purpose is the North Star, and people is at the center of the organization in connection with all of the stakeholders. And the secret for us leaders, and I'm sure you're going through the same at the school, is how do we unleash human magic? And that's really got to be the core focus, because we can be distracted. We can think about the brick and mortar of our buildings, a school or a retailer. We can think about the importance of technology. And don't get me wrong, technology is critically important. But even at a tech company, it's people who create, the technology. So one of the things I've learned a great deal about in the last, 10, 20, 30 years is what it takes to what I call unleash human magic. And it's not about incentives. It's not about extrinsic motivations. It's around intrinsic. And so I think there's been a lot of research on that. People don't like to be told. Incentives are actually, there's research on that, are counterproductive. If the task is more sophisticated than just hitting a nail, putting incentives in place actually deteriorates the performance. So the performance has got to come from within. So the ingredients I believe in to unleash human magic have to do with making sure everybody at the company is able to connect what drives them as individuals in their life with the purpose of the company. And I remember a store manager in our Boston market would ask every one of the associates, what is your dream? What is your dream in your life? And then he would say, my commitment to you is to work with you to help you achieve your dream as you work at Best Buy. It's a very different approach to traditional management. It's about building authentic human connections where people feel they exist, they belong, they're respected. So one of my compatriots, I'm French, Descartes, came up with the phrase cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I believe today it's more I am seen. People know I exist, therefore I am. It's easy to get lost in a big organization, but feeling respected, that people care deeply about you and have your back is essential. Creating a sense of autonomy. You and I know, because we lead big organizations, that if everything that happens is limited to what we decide or what we tell people to do, nothing's going to happen, right? So how do we create a sense where people can, be the best version of themselves and do great things for their various stakeholders? It's helping people achieve mastery. So, training, coaching, helping people grow, and then indeed creating a growth environment. The definition of life is growth. When there's no growth, there's no life. When there's no life, there's no growth. So as leaders, even in this crazy time we're going through, where a lot of companies are going to be severely hit, a lot of companies are going to have to shrink, how do we create a sense that it's actually possible to grow and that we can create innovation, we can innovate and have this sense of momentum and growth? So these are some of the ingredients, and it's all about creating this environment where this human magic can happen and create irrational outcomes. Because the sense about purposeful leadership is not solely about being nice and so forth, but it's about creating extraordinary outcomes for all of the stakeholders.
That's good. Let me just step back and put it in the context of the shareholder versus stakeholder conversation. Yeah. In some ways, your thesis is that having a strategy and a vision and a leadership along the lines of what you described is in some ways not in contradiction with the goal of even eventually maximizing the value. And you want to elaborate a little bit of that? This is clearly happening Best Buy, where under your leadership. But is that sort of, you believe that by doing that, especially over long periods of time, this is the outcome that emerges?
One of the greatest diseases in the mind of people and in the world is the idea of zero-sum games. So if you win, I lose, or if I win, you lose. I think this is so devious to think this way. One of the things I learned from a client when I was a consultant years ago was a basic concept of, in business, there's three imperatives. One is the people imperative. You need to have great people that are well trained, well equipped, and motivated. You have a business imperative. You need to have customers who are happy with your products and services and want more of those. And then you have a financial imperative, which is you just need to make money. And what my client was saying is that excellence on the people imperative leads to excellence on the business imperative, which leads to excellence on the financial imperative. And the best companies, I think we can all think of, the companies we admire the most, they tend to be great with their people, great with their customers, and achieve great financial results. And, one of the tricks I've used leading companies, whenever somebody comes and says, should we take care of the customers or the shareholders, or our employees or the customers or the shareholders, is to say 98% of the questions that are asked as either or are better answered as and. And it's by embracing, this expensive idea of you can take care of, in fact, the best approach is to take care of all of the stakeholders, and that there's no contradiction is the most promising. And the final thought on this, I think it's very important to not focus primarily on the financial outcome. And it's, in fact, it's almost a life philosophy. if it's true in sports, it's true in your life. If you focus too much on the outcome, you're going to lose some of your capabilities because you're going to be so tense. Whereas if you're focusing on doing your best to, grow the employees, grow the business, then the outcome generally will follow, knowing that there's a number of things you don't control, like this COVID crisis. Nobody can control it, but you can control what you can control. So you're absolutely right. It's there's no contradiction. You have to refuse the contradictions and embrace this, win-win-win approach. There's a great book by Rosamund and Ben Zander, The Art of Possibility, which provides a number of tricks around this. It's an expansive, positive view of the world.
Once you focus, I want to switch. I want to give an example that has been topical today, and I've heard different versions of that. And I want to talk about a little bit about Amazon right now. Yeah. And Amazon is an example of a company that is thriving today. It's also an example of a company that has hired about 100,000 individuals in the last 2 months.
Yeah. Yes.
It's also a company that has been criticized occasionally as in its rush, in some sense, to fulfill its mission and bring goods to people, that it puts lives at risk, possibly in the context of the pandemic. Efficiency, safety, quality, some of these things are conflicting objectives. And how do you think we should be thinking about all of these together? I mean, currently there is a very acute crisis that brings safety in sort of sharp focus in a way that hasn't been the case before. But in some sense, this tension between our emphasis on our employees and people and efficiency and performance metrics sometimes are in tension. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, and first thing is, I would say, any company can be criticized for, perfection does not really exist. So I'm not going to be the first person to throw a stone at Jeff Bezos and Amazon. In fact, I'm very grateful for all of the deliveries that they've been doing, frankly, over the last 2 months. But I think the point about this tension between employees and taking care of the employees and taking care of the profits, again, that's a zero-sum game that we have to refuse. We have to see employees as not a resource, not as a commodity, but as the source and the engine of business. And this has very concrete implications. So let me give you a few examples coming from the story of Best Buy. When I took over in September of 2012, as you mentioned, Costis, we were supposed to die. And a lot of analysts or advisors would tell me, you're going to have to close a lot of stores, you're going to have to fire a lot of people, and it's going to be cut. And in fact, we did the opposite. And it all started with people. So my first week on the job was spent working in stores, listening to the frontline employees, because I thought they would have the best insights in terms of how to, revitalize the company. So that's where I learned about, showrooming, people coming to our stores and speaking with the blue shirts, and then buying online because the prices were supposed to be cheaper. And so that's what led us to try to have competitive prices and match online prices. I learned that from people in the field. Similarly, somebody else in the St. Cloud store in Minnesota told me, do you know that the search engine on our bestbuy.com site is not working? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, type Cinderella in the search bar, and we found Nikon cameras, not quite the same. So getting the insights from the frontliners, focusing on building the best possible management team at the top to drive the turnaround. Also, from a turnaround standpoint, our first emphasis was, how can we grow the revenue? Because revenue is really helpful when you're trying to turn around the company. So invested in the online shopping experience, in the store shopping experience, doing these partnerships with the key vendors. Now, All of the world's foremost tech companies are investing with us in our stores, with these stores, within the stores. And as it relates to cost, you don't start with cutting heads. You actually start with going after non-salary expenses, which at most companies is the majority of the cost. Try to save on healthcare costs by having a healthier workforce. And you only go after headcount if revenue plus the non-salary expenses plus the management of the comp and ben is not sufficient. So you treat, you put cuts of headcount as the last resort. And similarly, when we went after the growth, that's what we talked about. It was all about pursuing our purpose of enriching lives through technology by unleashing this human magic that is creating this growth. So anybody who feels that by making shortcuts on how they treat their employees is going to lead to a better outcome, I think is completely misled. And this has I give you a very concrete implication that I learned a long time ago. Most companies do a weekly or monthly, business performance review. And the advice I got from the same client, actually, that I was mentioning earlier, was Hubert, in your monthly management meetings, end the meeting with finance. Don't start with finance. Start with people in organization. Then go talk about customers and products and business, and finish with finance. Your CFO will always make sure that you have enough time to go after the results. But if you start with the financial results, you won't have time for people and customers. So just flip it, was his advice.
That's interesting. It's a good insight for me to follow. I'm all ears. So thinking about your philosophy on leadership, which I find to be particularly resonating with many of us today. And we'll return to that. And we'll also return to your story from Best Buy and what is happening to the world today and what do we think about the future. But I want to selfishly move back to the MBA school. And, what do you think are important leadership skills or skill sets that our students should be honing in, especially when they're thinking of their lives, when you're thinking 5, 10, 15 years into the future, both the types of organizations that will be working at or leading and the world that will have changed by then?
Yeah. So there's two potential answers on this. One is, given the diversity and magnitude of challenges, you need to become excellent at strategy, at crisis management, at operations, at government relations, at your environmental and social impact. You need to be excellent at technology, at data. I know that's a passion of yours. All of these things are important. That's one answer. The other answer, which I think is even more important, is essentially being clear about who you are and who you want to be as a leader. I'll use an analogy that comes from Hortense Legentier, who is an executive leadership coach, published an article on LinkedIn that I thought was very compelling. She said, on a flight, if the oxygen comes out, the flight attendant will say, put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you help others. And in this crisis in particular, taking the time to think through, what kind of a leader do I want to be? What's important to me? What are my key values? How do I want to be remembered, 5 or 10 years from now? What is my purpose in life? Accumulating, I think it was Steve Jobs, one of the richest person on the planet, of course, unfortunately was sick with this terrible disease, pancreatic cancer. Towards the end of his life, or when he did this commencement speech at this tiny business school on the West Coast, Stanford something business school, some minor institution, talked about what is really important. So being clear about this and being clear about how you want to lead your life, which I think today is about leading from a place of purpose and humanity, being not afraid, being vulnerable, and being a very human kind of a leader. And I think that for me, that's it's a critical challenge. In fact, you and I lead the organization. I'd be curious to know, what are you learning yourself? Because you make it sound like I have all of the answers and you have the questions. So I'll turn the table on you for a second. As you lead this amazing organization through this crisis, what are you learning about leadership and what it takes, and what are you seeing?
It's an interesting question, and clearly I'm learning in dog years, so to speak, over the last 2 months. But I do think that I'll talk to you a little bit about the first 8 months, and because I haven't been doing it for too long, but and the last couple. I do think starting with a clear vision was important. You call it purpose, but having clarity of what do we want to be, where do we want to go. I thought that was important. I thought that empowering people was important, and I certainly don't want to be the bottleneck, but I wanted to empower people to actually make decisions, push the organization forward, be creative. My style is to be transparent, which coincidentally sounds like it's something that you appreciate as well, and approachable. And I think that's how I've been for the last decade, 2 decades here at the school, and I'm like that now.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I tend to be a little bit, and I think this has been useful lately, proactive in not just dealing with conflicts, but just not being averse of confronting issues, but in some sense, rolling my sleeves and getting into them with people to sort of try to help and sort of lead us towards a path. But I would say clarity and empowerment has been the key tenets, and being approachable. And I have to say, if I switch to the last 2 months, like in many organizations, but certainly in our organization at the university, but also at the school, at the microcosm that we have, it is incredible what the few hundreds of people that we have, the faculty and the staff, have managed to do to essentially continue to lead this amazing institution, carry through its mission, all working from our homes remotely. Like we had to switch our existence in the span of a day, and it is truly people coming together, being collaborative, being resourceful, because as you said, nobody plans for a pandemic. So in some sense, we didn't have a playbook about this is what you do when you're dealing with such a crisis. So we had to improvise. We had to work together in ways that perhaps we hadn't done in the past. And I think, again, being open, being approachable, being collaborative, humble, but with a clear purpose of what it is that we're trying to do. We need, in some sense, we got to pick what is it that we're doing and execute in a resolute way. And for us was to put the safety of our community first, but then to sort of deliver the educational mission of the institution. We had to continue to try to the best that we can deliver the education that we should deliver to our students. And I think people stepped up in amazing ways. And I think that story probably resonates with people in many, many organizations. And I'm sure you have the same story from Best Buy, in the sense of suddenly, even though everybody had to be remote, and as I like to say, we become multidimensional extreme jugglers in our lives, nevertheless, suddenly we all have to do more things, and we have to do even our main thing better than before.
And so I think that there's a lot of commonality between what you're saying and what I'm feeling, which is, if I had two keywords, again, it centers around this notion of leading with purpose and humanity. That's what I'm seeing all around. It's really inspiring to see how so many great leaders are leading their organization with these two elements in mind.
Yeah, it's challenging, of course.
You're not kidding.
It's challenging these days, and in some sense, we're fortunate that we're in an amazing institution surrounded by amazing people, but the world is going through a very interesting and disruptive phase, and in some sense, it's our responsibility to actually help us navigate through this crisis. Let me switch back into something that is closer to your world in Best Buy, because in some sense, the disruption we're feeling right now is one that highlights actually the strength and capabilities of your firm. The sort of how technology has become even more of an enabler of us doing our job. How potentially our ability to even seamlessly do our job from our homes is, so in some sense, we're changing how we're doing things. And a firm like yours ends up being part of the solution. Is that something that you see? Is that something that you see that continuing in the future? What are your thoughts about that?
Yes. So, yes, the last 2 months have been, as they say, interesting. Clearly, the first priority was to take care of the safety of the employees and the customers. And to your point, we've been deemed essential by most of the states, which means that we had the right to continue to operate our stores and our operation, because everybody's working from home, learning from home, eating at home. So computers, networking equipment, video conferencing equipment, refrigerators were in high demand. So we've actually shared this with the market that when the virus hit, we saw a spike in demand. At the same time, Corey Barry, my wonderful successor as CEO, at some point decided to close all of the stores to customer traffic because she felt she was not able to provide the appropriate safety and security for the employees and the customers. So we moved to curbside pickup. With all of the store closed, she was able to maintain more than 70% of the previous revenue, which to your point shows that how essential we are. Now we are gradually reopening with appointments in the stores, which actually is not a bad experience because it's more of a concierge experience, which can be very, very positive. To your point about what will happen going forward, and I think there's a general point here. Many companies are going to be hit negatively by this crisis because the recession, the macro environment is going to hurt. The companies, in order to react to this, being able to have a range of services and approaches that are in line with your purpose as a company and deal with the safety issues that we'll have, we'll be able to do well. And so one of the things that I think if Corey was here, she would say that the strategy we had devised before the coronavirus crisis is going to serve us well as we move forward because it's going to provide additional growth opportunities. As an example, and that's the importance of leading from a place of purpose. So our purpose at Best Buy is to enrich lives through technology by addressing key human needs. Note that it doesn't talk about brick and mortar stores or just consumer electronics. But a human need, of course, as we all appreciate now, is health. And one of the initiatives we've had is to help aging seniors live in their home independently longer. But we put sensors under their bed, in the bathroom, in the kitchen, maybe on them, to detect falls. And with remote monitoring and artificial intelligence, you can actually detect if there's a problem. And now with the explosion of telemedicine, the ability to support patients, starting with aging seniors, in their home is, of course, something that's gonna boom. And so it's a good illustration of, trying to grow a company from a place of purpose, and in this case now dealing with safety issues to ignite new growth opportunities. So that's why, as we go through this crisis, that's a good way to move forward and, find growth opportunities.
Interesting. You mentioned two things, and I want to sort of latch onto them and talk a little bit about it. One is telemedicine. The other one is essentially how we're changing our habits through this forced experiment. The whole planet is going through a forced behavioral experiment. And as we exit that experiment over time, we were likely to have changed how we do things. And in particular, we may work from home a little bit more. Telemedicine is something that we have all been talking for about a decade. And to be honest, telemedicine started on March 9th. And on March 8th, we announced at the university that we're going remote. We sent that email around 9 p.m., I remember, because we were working round the clock during that weekend. And then we had to switch online. The hospital essentially said nothing. Nobody comes to the hospital because we're switching entirely to COVID-19 treatments. And, and it started. And these are two things that will probably stay with us.
Yeah.
Right. And so do you imagine, thinking about the future of work right now for a second, do you imagine a work environment or a work model where, for example, the connection to your workplace, whether you work from your office, whether you spend some time at home, that is going to become more fluid? Do you imagine a world that in 5 or 10 years, this boundary would be completely different than what it is right now?
Yes, because it's one of the things I've learned in this crisis is that there's a lot that I don't know. And so, but let me try to answer this. I think that the way as we lead our organizations, thinking in terms of restarting and going back to the way it was is a big mistake. It's much more about a reset, because we will have learned so much, during this crisis. That'd be crazy. Take telemedicine. Telemedicine was something people talked about, but it never happened. Now, with the regulations having been lifted, it's now happening. I certainly hope we never go back to the restrictions, and we'll have to fight back. There's so many opportunities, and we'll need these opportunities from thinking in terms of reset rather than restart. If you take work from home, I think we've all discovered that it can be very efficient. And the notion of commuting, in some places people commute for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes per day. That's a waste of time. And with technology, you can work very effectively in many, many cases. So this will lead to probably better quality of life in some ways, also savings. Companies are going to need to save money in this recessionary environment. Being able to save on real estate and other costs will be very important. But importantly, we have to think about the opportunities this involves. if you go back to, so here's a thought. If you go back to the 1990s, I think many of us were around. There was a big focus on core process reengineering, where you would take a process and rethink the process with the view to simultaneously improve cost, quality, and service or time. Okay, we're in the Deming Center here, so we know all about operations. I think if we re-engineer our businesses with a focus on purpose and safety, this can lead to process and product innovation. So a few examples. A company like Adobe, every year they would do a meeting of their customers and business partners in Vegas, 15,000 people. They're now doing it digitally, of course, this year. They're getting 80,000 participants. So you can vastly increase your reach through digital technology. Similarly, think about the store, the Ralph Lauren store on Madison Avenue, the Mansion, beautiful store. It's a beautiful store if you live in New York or if you're traveling from China or from Europe to visit that store. But if you live in Minneapolis or Alaska, not so helpful. Now you can think about digital clienteling at scale. My salesperson, Eric Walker, can now video conference me in from Alaska or Minnesota, and he can reach the world through the store. So telemedicine is another example. If you're a museum, if you think about a museum as a brick and mortar business, it's not going to be a good future. If you think about a museum as being an organization whose mission is to provide, show the wonder of art, to a population, digitally, there's a whole number of things you can do. Similarly, if you're in a restaurant business, if you think about your business as the four walls, you're going to be limited for quite a while. But if you can think about pickup, delivery, sending the chef to your home, or starting a business like Blue Apron, where you ship the ingredients and the recipe to the customers. So we're going to need, if we don't want to just shrink, we're going to need to reinvent our businesses, our business models, innovate with products and processes. And I think it's around purpose and this notion of safety.
So I see in the chat box that we started getting questions, and I will soon switch to them. But you mentioned reset as opposed to, let's say, restart. And I guess implicit in that, and your comments after that, is that you expect that the way we're going to be operating 3 months from now, 6 months from now, whenever the new normal emerges, will be essentially different than what was happening before. And you think that that should be core into how we're thinking about our sort of return to normalcy. Is that accurate? An accurate description of what?
I think it's both. It's going to be both a necessity and an opportunity. It's going to be a necessity because many businesses will be negatively impacted by this crisis. So they're going to need to find more effective and more efficient ways in technology. There's going to be people say there's going to be a 5-year acceleration of digital transformations. So it's both a necessity and an opportunity because we're going to need additional revenue streams to offset the negative macro environment. And of course, some companies, as we know, will disappear because planet Earth has been hit by an asteroid and the dinosaurs are going to die. And, the agile, innovative companies are going to be able to make it. But you need to be on the right side of this equation.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to, rather than monopolizing you, Hubert, I'm going to start switching to what some of our audience participants have been asking. And I'll start with some COVID-19 related questions and then move past it to purposeful leadership. But thinking about today, thinking about the last 2 months, thinking about the next 2, 6, 12 months, as we're navigating our sample path through this process, what are your thoughts about leadership communication?
Yeah, so communication has been essential. The intensity of communication in the last 2 months has been extraordinary, and will need to continue to be extraordinary, right? Because there's so much is happening. And I think that one of the ways to think about this is in phases. So many companies deal with this crisis maybe with 3 broad phases. One has been the shelter-in-place phase, where we had to react and immediately adapt. 2 is the reopening phase. We're getting ready for that reopening phase. And then there's the post-COVID-19 phase. In the initial phase, reaching out to the employees quickly and the customers was really important. Being authentic and vulnerable. So a phrase that many of us had to practice during that time was, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. And I'm hoping to know what I don't know in that time frame, and I'll keep you updated. And the time horizon was very short. I remember, certainly at Best Buy, we were thinking of a 2-week time horizon. We will operate the stores this way for the next 2 weeks. And by the way, sometimes in the first week of these 2 weeks, we'd say, oh, we have changed our mind. Because at some point we wanted to limit the number of customers, keep the stores open, but limit the number of customers coming into the store. We tried that, didn't work out for a whole variety of reasons. Said, all right, so now we're moving to curbside pickup. We'll continue to pay the employees for the next 2 weeks. I think one of the things we've all learned in this phase, and I think that will continue, is the importance of eye contact, right? Because we were all, working from home, and I don't know about you, Augustus, but I don't want to do one more phone call. If I'm going to communicate with somebody, I need to see their face. And so whenever there's a phone call set up, I always switch to FaceTime or Zoom or any one of these approaches. Making yourself available. Again, technology can be a friend. So if you're the leader of a global organization, you would visit Shanghai or Delhi maybe once or twice per year. Now, I've seen CEOs do office hours, happy hours, where anybody can connect. And so you get the opportunity to directly interact with people around the world. Being very authentic and very human. One of the things I've learned is how we need to get to know and deal with the whole range of human needs of our employees. It's not just paying them a salary, it's not just their safety, but it's their emotional needs, their need for human connections, their need for meaning. Why are we staying open? As a university or as Best Buy, why are we doing this? What are we doing, to take care of the community? At Ralph Lauren, they closed all of the stores, and not many people are buying clothes. They decided to shift some of their manufacturing to making gowns and masks. That gives meaning to. So that was the first phase. In this reopening phase, again, putting the emphasis, involving the employees on defining how to reopen, what's going to make it safe, and telling them what we know, what we don't know, the experimentations we're making. In the preparation for the post-COVID phase, where we know the world is not going to be as grand and as booming as it was before, involving the employees and their creativity in the development of the strategy for post-COVID, in what are some of the innovations, how do we reinvent the business for this post-COVID phase? So it's a two-way communication, it's a very human, very humble, very transparent, very vulnerable communication. My name is Hubert, and I need help, is a phrase also I've tried to practice during these times.
You mentioned community, and in the past we talked about stakeholders, and we touched upon employees, customers, shareholders. And you mentioned Ralph Lauren's example of essentially dedicating, important, expensive company resources in fact serving a community purpose. Can you give us some examples or thoughts about that? Do you think of this as yet one more responsibility of a leader and of an elite corporation?
I think it's absolutely is the case, because anybody as a leader of a company who believes that they can thrive while ignoring what's happening in the community around them is extraordinarily short-sighted, in this crisis is the absolute, completely clear demonstration that, if the world around you is collapsing, it's hard to operate a business successfully. So we've seen in different ways very inspiring examples. So we've talked about Ralph. I think LVMH converted some of their plants in France that do the Christian Dior perfume to making the the gels to clean our hands. It's about the collaboration. So at the state level in this country, it's businesses working with the governor and the community on what's the best way to reopen here. How do we create an operating model to be able to safely reopen? How do we? Because you need to coordinate between the reopening of the businesses, the reopening of the schools. If the schools don't reopen, it's hard to have people go to the office. So there's this partnership. Different companies have another dimension, which is the intersection between community and business, which is your suppliers. A lot of small businesses are going to find it really hard to survive in this environment. As a large company, it's my responsibility to make sure that certainly my strategic suppliers are able to make it. So how do I extend terms to these suppliers so that they can continue to operate? How do I support the local community? Because there will be a post-COVID, and if the post-COVID world is only I as a business have survived, everything around me collapse, it's not going to be pretty. So we're dealing with very complex ecosystems, and we have to behave as good corporate citizens that are, members of these communities. And we know that you have to do well by doing good, and it's hard to do well if the world around you is not doing well. That's a good reminder of that, if you need one.
Yeah. I have to advertise, not to advertise, but some of our students right now in the summer are going to spend a lot of time helping our local small businesses in the campus community. The university is making some resources available so that we can give them some money, but the reality is how much, to whom, when, how to spend it when you actually try to restart the company. And a lot of our MBA students, both in the summer, but I expect also during the fall, will be involved in truly trying to help, because that is a crucial piece. And that's a place where, as you said, you want to function in a thriving community.
That's right.
Like, so it sounds like you're doing something good for the community, but the reality is you're doing it because you want to be part of a thriving community. You don't want these businesses to go under or what have you.
And so maybe this crisis is the opportunity to have a declaration, not of independence, but a declaration of interdependence.
Yeah. You also mentioned, I see a comment here in the chat about governments, and in some sense, we have found ourselves, even as a university, a lot of things were happening. We had to wait for what the governor is going to say. We needed to get approval from the governor. Like a lot of things are interdependent in a way that oftentimes is not the case, and it is likely that we're going to navigate a period, certainly over the next year, that we'll have to be in lockstep in some sense, because decisions that we make at the university or at the company rely on decisions that others make at the state level or the national level. And the question that we had in the chat box, it was whether even in the business school, students need to somehow be exposed in understanding a little bit how government works, government relations, regulatory issues that have, in the last 12 years, previous crisis, this crisis, have played an important role. And I'll share my comment at the end, but you think that that's important?
I have a degree in business administration and a degree in public administration, both from Paris. And one of my greatest joys, in fact, as a CEO of Best Buy, and prior to that, when I was at Carlson Companies, was to interact with both the federal government and the local governments, because we are interdependent. And so to provide an example, this is going to date me and is almost going to sound ridiculous. When I was in the travel industry, I was on the Travel and Tourism Advisory Board of the Secretary of Commerce to see how we could attract more international tourists to the US as a way to boost exports and jobs, and by making it easier for foreign tourists to have to get a tourist visa. Because if you lived in Brazil at the time, you need to have a face-to-face interview for your visa. And if you lived in Manaus, you need to go to Brasilia or Rio with your entire family in order to visit Disneyland or Disney World. And the wait time to get a visa at the time was about 100 days. And so, of course, we were missing the tourists from Brazil. They were all going to Europe. And so as a way to grow the business in the US at the time, it felt that working with the State Department and Homeland Security and so forth to, without compromising security, improve the visa process was a good example. Similarly, at Best Buy, I spent a lot of time trying to convince Congress, eventually the Supreme Court, to compel the remote sellers to collect the sales tax. Because for many years, companies like Amazon were subsidized by the federal government because they didn't have to collect the sales tax, which didn't seem to be quite right. So I think it's part of the job, Costis, and I think understanding how it works is part of what's needed.
Good. So at the university and at the business school in particular, we have strong ties both in the law school and our School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA. And I agree that we need to ensure that aspect of running a company, both here and abroad, and certainly running a global company where it becomes even more complicated, our students need to be exposed, because it becomes crucial. And it becomes crucial in many different ways. You talked about Best Buy and talking to essentially people in Washington about sales tax being sort of collected from people that are shipping TVs as opposed to coming to the store. But now there is this whole discussion that's happening in Europe, and how our tech companies in the US operate in Europe, and the taxation system. And,
That's right.
These are things that are fundamentally touching many of the services that we're delivering right now. And it's important to know sort of the complexity of all of that. I completely agree. You mentioned something, and there's a question here that I wanted to touch upon about your experience from Best Buy. Best Buy being, a lot bigger organization than the sort of 600 or 700 people that work at Columbia Business School. But once we all stay at home and we engage in work, there is the question about how do you ensure that people are productive in what they're doing from home? That's one end of that spectrum. The other end of that spectrum is how do we protect or help people navigate that boundary between work and home? Because clearly work has now seeped into our home routine, and it's important for people to sort of be able to sort of separate. What has been the experience at Best Buy?
It's back to this notion of leading with purpose and humanity. We're learning, all of us are learning so much on the question of how do you ensure people are productive at home, knowing that some of our employees are going to be in homes where it's really hard for them to work from home is something you never had to figure out. And it can be hard to work from their home either because they live in a rural community where broadband is not accessible, or it can be that the size of their home is such that with their partner, spouse, their children, there's not enough space for everybody to work from home or not enough bandwidth. So as we think about bringing people back to the office, one of the criteria potentially is going to be who has the hardest time working from home and therefore should be given priority to go back home. The other thing is, mental health is such an important consideration at any point in time, and these things that don't get talked about necessarily. At any point in time in any population, there's probably 20% of us who suffer from mental health issues. And it was a big change at Best Buy when we started to talk about this publicly. Our head of HR, Cami, one day, gave a speech at a town hall describing how she had to struggle with depression a while back. And that opened up the conversation about, being human. And knowing which one of our employees are struggling with mental health, providing access to mental health support, providing training potentially to employees on how to navigate this new life we're going through. Again, there's this executive coach, Hortense Legentier, that I was mentioning earlier, has got some advice on this. Back to the mask discussion. How do you establish a daily routine every day, taking care of not just your physical health, you have to exercise, but also, your spiritual life. And how do you make sure that every day that you're trying to be the best leader you can be? So at the end of the day, you sit down and review your day and ask yourself, did I do my best today to be a human leader, to take care of Mary, who is going through mental health issues, and being approachable, and so forth. So I think the notion of bringing your whole self to work, I think we're living it, and I think it's opening a new dimension of leadership. Again, that's very human, where we need to comprehend and embrace the whole range of the human needs of our employees. And there's so much to learn for all of us, self included, on how to be the best leader we can be in this time. And that, again, I'll repeat, my name is Hubert and I need help. It's new and it's hard.
I need to start using that because I desperately need help. But I have many other questions, and I know I'm trying to look at the time, but I want to touch on a few more things before we run out of time. The first is go back to your purposeful leadership. And I know you've actually endowed a chair for that back in your home institution in Paris. But thinking about publicly, you worked in a partnership, and you've gone, both for private organizations, but also large publicly traded organizations. In what sense, how does it differ, the sense of purpose and leading with a purpose in a publicly traded organization where there are clearly different levels, different scrutiny, different accountability, versus a private setting? And I'm saying that also because as a European, in Europe, there are many more such privately held organizations,
right.
So that's the first question.
Yeah, so you're right. I've worked in, so Best Buy is publicly traded. Carlson is a family-owned, completely private organization.
Yep.
Carlson Wagonly Travel was partly owned by private equity, which is also a different world. I have chosen to lead in these organizations in exactly the same way. And sometimes people talk about, the pressure of shareholders on quarterly earnings as something that makes the job of the public company CEO harder. I think you, as a public company CEO, you have to refuse this as a potential excuse. And I was thrilled when Larry Fink, the CEO of Blackrock, came out, was it 2 or 3 years ago now? And wrote to all of us public company CEOs and said, tell me about your purpose as a company. Tell me about your long-term strategy. Don't bother me with your quarterly earnings. Now, sometimes analysts do talk to us about quarterly earnings, but he was encouraging. And Bill McNabb of Vanguard was essentially saying the same thing in the Business Roundtable statement on corporate purpose, and the point of view that Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett have adopted around quarterly. Now, encouraging companies to abandon quarterly guidance, all going in the same direction, which is that you have to, believe in what you're doing, and take a perspective where, of course, you cannot ignore the short term. You have to. It's one of these things where you have to do short term and long term, but you have to have the confidence that if you believe in something, you can go to your shareholders, whether they're public or private. They're all human beings. They're all smart. They all want to do, ultimately the right thing, and say, look, I'm going to make this investment. In the short term, this is what it's going to do, and then here's the payback, and that's why I'm doing it. And my experience is that I think if you have built credibility and you are forthright and transparent, people will support you. And I was struck by, when Jeff Bezos reported their Q1 earnings, was it 2 weeks ago? He said normally in Q2 we would make $4 billion, and our forecast is that probably we're going to make zero, because we're going to invest in the safety of our employees and customers. And if you're a shareholder, you should take a seat while I do this. And I'm confident that our long-term shareholders will understand that it makes sense to do this. And so I've found, Costis, that sometimes it's in our heads that we believe people expect something of us. I think we have in ourselves, be clear about what we believe, and try to do the right thing. So I think these differences tend to be, in my view and experience, overrated.
Fully agree with what you're saying, but it's good to take it out. I have 2 more questions as we're running down our clock, and one is there are many questions in the chat about running a sales organization, and how do you incentivize them? How do you train them? How do you run a corporation where, in some sense, having thousands of salespeople is part of it? And it's funny because as now the dean, I've been talking to many alums, and a lot of them are saying, well, we don't have a good sales management course in the business school. It's not an academic discipline, so to speak, and ultimately we don't teach it. But then, of course, you go to work, and that's crucially important, right? So, what are some of your thoughts around running a sales organization? How do you incentivize, train them? How do you align them to the purpose when they have, specific financial goals and mindsets? Which, you have your own experience from having run 2 big organizations, but this is everywhere. Right?
And that's a wonderful question for me, so thank you, because Best Buy, in many ways, is a giant sales organization with all of the blue shirts in the stores. And the caricature of a sales organization is, you have high-charging salespeople who are highly incentivized to achieve certain goals. And I'm so proud of our organization at Best Buy with the blue shirts, and I have to give credit to the founder, Dick Schultz, and Brad Anderson is number 2, who in the 1990s did away with sales commissions, because they did an assessment at the time that consumer electronic stores, you may remember this, you would go to the store, you didn't have direct access to the product, and the salesperson would only show you the product that they wanted. And there were something called the spiff, which were incentives provided by the vendors.
Yes.
And the margin was completely different. So they would sell you what was financially attractive for the company, which led to a terrible experience. And so Dick and Brad decided to eliminate commissions, which many people thought they were crazy. But that, I think, has been a key driver of Best Buy's success over the years, because it was a case then where the blue shirt was there to really facilitate, support the customer in their journey and their decision. And solely driven by, the way we said today, enriching the life of the customers through the help of technology. And I'll just describe, a story of a customer in our Mountain View store in California. She walks into the store and she's looking for headphones. And the blue shirt, Anthony Vu, who's a sales supervisor, doesn't start telling her, well, you should buy these expensive, $300, $400 headphones, but ask her, what are you going to use them for? And she says, I'm going to use them at work. And therefore, it's important to me that if my colleague talks to me, that I hear this person. So she didn't want a noise canceling headphone. She needed the relatively cheaper headphone. And Anthony was very happy to sell her these headphones. And so what I've learned at Best Buy is the importance of making sure all of our 125,000 employees connect with the purpose of the company, and that they understand it's all about being human and being an inspiring friend for the customers and taking care of them in a way that they can be proud of. And the big responsibility of the CEO or the leadership team is not to come up with the most brilliant strategy. That's, of course, we have to do this, but is to create an environment where every one of the employees feel that they're on a mission to connect in a very human fashion with every one of the customers and do the right thing. And I was touched, during this crisis. Of course, we order online from a variety of vendors, including Best Buy. And in one of the boxes that we got, it was a note it was a ship from store box. It's a box that was shipped from the stores. A note from the salesperson saying, "Oh, we miss you." And he didn't know he was talking to the chairman of the board. He was talking to a customer. And that's a very human behavior. And so incentives are a hugely overrated. In fact, it's a poisonous. Rewards are good. You want to share wealth creation, but relying on incentives to drive behavior can be very, very dangerous. So you have to rethink how to inspire, a large number of people to do the right thing for the customers and be the best version of themselves.
Last question about retailing and brick and mortar retailing and the future of that. And what are your thoughts? And understanding that in some sense, Best Buy had to go through that almost a decade ago, right? In some sense, even though you have physical stores, your physical stores are being used as showrooms, as you said before, as opposed to just the place where you transact. But what do you think is the future of physical retailing? There are consequences to real estate, there are consequences to a lot of things, but what are your thoughts on that through the...
I think there's a bright future for retailing because as consumers we need, and when I say retail, it doesn't necessarily mean brick and mortar retailing, but the bar is being raised on every company that there's going to be a greater and greater differentiation between the winners and the losers. If you have a business model that's dated and your capital structure is challenged, well, you're going to file for bankruptcy. We've seen Neiman Marcus, I don't know what's going to happen at JCPenney. There's J. Crew and so forth. If at the same time, or if on the other end, you have a clear purpose, it's clear why you exist. The reason why Best Buy exists is that it's not because that's the only place where you can buy, a phone or a computer. It's because this is a place where, whether it's online, in the store, or in people's homes, you have access to the technology and you get help. And you're going to have people, again, online or in the stores or in the home, that can understand your needs and do a great job of satisfying your needs. And if you're able to do this digitally and humanly in a way that's operationally excellent, the dynamic center, so operationally excellent, And so if you have a place that's really pursuing a clear, inspiring purpose for customers and for the employees, and where the employees are charged up and keep creating amazing, lovely experiences for customers, then I think you can have a bright future. But the differentiation between winners and losers is going to be sharper and sharper, I think.
Okay. Hubert, we can keep going, but I know we've been at it for quite some time, and I have to let you go because you have a board meeting after that. But thank you so much for taking the time. It's always a pleasure to talk, and as I said in the onset, we all look forward to having you be a lot more engaged with the school. So thank you.
And Costis, it's a delight to be associated with your amazing organization. I'm now a New Yorker. I've moved from Minneapolis to New York, and I'm a proud member of the same community. So I look forward to spending more time.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.